Welcome, my dear audience and friends, to Cancer Convos with Grace B. This is your host, Grace B, coming to you from New York City, the city that never sleeps and is home to Cancer Convos with Grace B. I would like to thank you all for your amazing support on all my platforms. For the newbies, this show aims to always demystify the cancer disease and to bring on experts and stakeholders in the cancer space that will give their valid takes on this disease. Like I always harp, do not forget to do your medical checks because until there's a cure, prevention is the cure. So, my dear audience and friends, in this episode, we are going to be discussing mesothelioma. It's a tongue twister, but I'm going to have to get used to it. Mesothelioma. And this rare cancer stems from the exposure to a hazardous substance called asbestos, which was once referred to as the miracle mineral because of its resistance to heat, fire, water, chemicals, and electricity. But as you know, now we know that it has caused more deaths and more damage as people are not diagnosed with this asbestos-related disease until decades after the exposure. Decades. So in this episode, my next amazing guest, Heather von St. James, who is a 15-year malignant pleural mesothelioma survivor and a staunch advocate for this rare disease, has written several articles concerning her experience and is a top keynote speaker at several conferences relating to this. She continuously works to raise awareness on the disease and asbestos, and she will be sharing the story of her diagnosis and all that we need to know about the dangers of asbestos and its correlation to mesothelioma and lung cancer. Therefore, without much ado, let me welcome the lovely Heather von St. James to the show. Welcome, Heather, and so lovely to see you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. This is such an honor to be here. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. So let's dive straight into the topic because this is something that has been, giving me cause for concern after I discussed with you and all that. I went to town and read up everything, possible about this disease. And it's surprising what I got to learn about it. But I'd love the audience to hear from you, being that you have experienced this and you've experienced the effects and you have gone through treatment. But before then, please tell us a little bit about yourself, family background, please.
Well, I just turned 52. I just had a birthday on the 5th of January.
Yes, I know. I wished you a birthday, didn't I?
Yes, you did. So I just turned 52. I'm a mother to one child that they were 3 months old when I was diagnosed, and I'm happily married to my husband, Cameron, and we've been married for, it'll be 22 years in April.
Wow.
So, yes. So,
Congratulations.
I grew up in a small town in South Dakota, one of two kids. My sister is my older sister. And I grew up together with my mom and dad, and my dad did construction when I was growing up. A lot of what he did was drywall work and demolishing old apartments for rehabbing and stuff like that. So, I grew up with my dad coming home covered in dust and dirt, and his coat was always this crusty coat. But, it's like, that's the house I grew up in. He was a hunter and he was a volunteer fireman. So, serviceman's heart. And so I grew up, in this small town in South Dakota and moved to Minneapolis 23 years ago. And I've been living in Minneapolis, St. Paul ever since.
Oh, wow.
So,
Fantastic. I have friends there, so I'm going to check
wonderful.
you out anytime I visit, honestly.
Yes, please do.
Will do. So, Heather, you were diagnosed with mesothelioma, and please explain to us what this is and what are the symptoms, what are the causes? Is it curable? Because these are things that, really got me agitated when I read about it.
Yeah. So mesothelioma is the cancer of the lining of the organs. So I had pleural mesothelioma, which is the lining of the lung, but
Mm-hmm.
there's two other main types, and that's peritoneal, which is lining of the abdomen, and then pericardial, which is lining of the heart. So the material that lines all the organs is called mesothelium. And that's why the cancer is called mesothelioma, because it's cancer of the lining. Um, there's other more rarer types, like well-differentiated papillary meso, which typically happens in the abdomen. And then there's also testicular mesothelioma, which obviously happens in the lining of the testes. But those are very, very rare. The most common is pleural mesothelioma, which is the one I had.
Mm-hmm.
But even though it's the most common, less than 3,000 people a year are diagnosed with mesothelioma in the United States. So it's a very rare cancer. And because of that, not a lot of research goes forward into it. And it is considered terminal. There is no cure. There are treatments that they hope will be curative, but there's no proof because one person can go through it and then the next can go through the exact same thing and the outcomes are completely different. So it is considered a terminal disease, no cure, but there are exciting things happening in research
Mm-hmm.
through NIH and through other top-notch places in the United States that are having great results with clinical trials and stuff like that. So there is hope. There's definitely hope on the horizon for treatment of this disease.
Oh, thank God for that.
Yeah.
I needed to go back a bit when you were talking about your father and that he was, because of his work, he must have been very much exposed to asbestos, being a fireman and being in,
Mhm.
you know, demolition of, construction sites and all that. Was he affected by this too?
So my dad passed from kidney cancer. It'll be 8 years ago in February.
Oh, wow.
The doctors think that the kidney cancer was most likely caused by asbestos exposure, but
Hmm.
there's no proof. It's just kind of like a speculation at this point.
Okay.
Um, I feel like it probably was caused by that because it can cause kidney cancer as well. It causes a host of other cancers, not just mesothelioma,
Mm-hmm.
but mesothelioma is the main one. But yeah, my dad worked with asbestos when he was doing construction, and that's how I was exposed, was through his work.
Yes.
So, and that's how, I came to be
You
sick
came
30 years
came came
later.
to be sick. Oh my goodness. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry about that. So, could you please walk us, through your treatments? I mean, how did you get to know that? How did you get to be diagnosed? What symptoms did you actually have prior to the diagnosis?
So I had a baby. So Lily was born, and after I had her,
Mm-hmm.
upon releasement from the hospital, they said, you're a little anemic. You might want to get that checked, up your iron intake a little bit. But yeah, you're pretty anemic, so you might want to get that taken care of. So I'd had a C-section, so I'd been in the hospital, a few extra days. And the other curious thing was I only gained 5 pounds through the whole pregnancy. So, that's not really smart. you know
Yes.
but my OBGYN was not worried because it's kind of a bigger gal, so she's like, you're healthy, the baby's growing, everything is measuring fine. And when Lily was born, she was great, and so everything was seemingly okay.
Normal. Yes.
Yeah, but after she was born, the first puzzling symptoms was this little fever. I would get a fever at the same time every day. It was in the late afternoon, early evening. It would last for a couple hours. I would take a couple Tylenol and it would go away. It was like 99, 100, never over 100.5. So that was like the first symptom. Then mid-October, it felt like a truck parked on my chest. So Lily was born in August. September, I felt okay, but this fever thing. And then I'd gone back to work. And I felt like a truck parked on my chest. I couldn't breathe very well.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was losing weight really quick. Now hindsight, one of the main symptoms of cancer is rapid weight loss, and I was losing like 5 pounds a week. So
Oh, wow. That was
yeah,
something.
yeah, and I was pale. I was so pale. I'm pale anyways, but I was even more so during this. And so what tipped me off that something was seriously wrong was I went downstairs to get laundry. We live in an old house. The laundry's in the basement. Lily was asleep in her swing. I went downstairs to get laundry to get dressed for work, and I could hardly make it up the stairs. I had to stop halfway up the stairs and was gasping. It's like,
Oh,
it was
wow.
just like, oh, this is terrible. And then I got to the top of the stairs and was still just gasping for air. And I dragged the laundry into the living room, sat on the couch, and I passed out. And I woke up like an hour later. I was terrified. Lily was in her swing cooing away. Thank God she was, okay. And I was like, well, there's something wrong with me. So I called my doctor immediately and was like, John, there's something wrong with me. I need to get in. And he was like, yeah, come on in. And so they did blood work and it showed that I was anemic. And so he's like, you're probably just really anemic. Let's get you on some iron. And if you're not feeling better in a week, come back and we'll do some more tests. Well, I wasn't better. In fact, I was worse. I was still gasping for breath and so tired, and I'd lost
Yeah.
another like 5 pounds. So he's like, there's something wrong. He thought I had a heart virus that some women get postpartum.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was afraid that I had this heart virus. So he sent me for a chest x-ray after doing, getting so much blood drawn. I was surprised I had any blood left. But sent me for the chest x-ray. And when he came back in the room, he's like, you've got fluid around your lung. He's like,
Around
I
your
don't know what,
lungs.
around my lung. So it wasn't
Okay.
in my lung, it was on the outside and it was
Mm-hmm.
crushing my lung up out of the way. He's like, you've got fluid around your lung. That's why you can't breathe. I need you to go to the hospital, get that drained. I'm like, okay, what? All
Oh,
right,
wow.
and I had Lily with me at the time. So I got this little baby in the stroller with me. And he's like, call your husband, have him meet you at home, and then you got to get to the hospital. So next thing I know, I'm in the hospital and they're draining fluid off my lung, a procedure called a thoracentesis.
Mm-hmm.
Quite bluntly, they stick a needle in your back and pull the fluid out, And the doctor that did that kept saying, And I'm like, hey, dude, what are you saying for? And he's like, well, the fluid is a weird color. I was expecting it to be kind of straw-like, but it was like the color of iced tea. So he's like, there's
What?
definitely something going on. He goes, I got to send you for a chest CT. So, and you know how hospitals are. You're in the basement or bottom of the hospital,
Yes, that's where
walking through
everything is
those
done. The
halls out.
basement.
The basement,
Absolutely.
they call it the bowels of the hospital.
Hmm.
And it's just dank and quiet and deserted down there. And I'm walking through these, deserted hallways trying to find the CT place. And I just remember feeling very alone and very scared because my husband had to take care of our baby. I didn't have anybody with me.
Mm-hmm.
And had a CT scan, and that's when they found the mass.
It was a
So
mass.
a mass. They had found a mass in the lower left part of my lung. So, in the next day, I had to go for a CT assisted biopsy. And then it was 2 weeks before I got a diagnosis. So,
Hmm.
2 weeks of wondering and, waiting and anxiety. And he finally called us into the hospital and the doctor's office. And he said, you have a disease called malignant pleural mesothelioma. And I was clueless. It didn't ring a bell. It didn't click. I thought I had lung cancer. I knew I had cancer at that point, but I had no idea what kind. And my husband looked at the doctor's like, whoa, that's bad. And then the doctor
Wow.
asked me, did your dad ever work in a mine or do construction?
You see?
I'm like, yeah, I did. He did construction growing up. And that's when it started to click, childhood
Mm-hmm.
memories of my school being abated, the asbestos in my school being abated, my dad coming home with crusty work clothes. And, he put two and two together for me and said, you were exposed to asbestos when you were young. This mesothelioma has a 10 to 50-year latency period. You're right at 30 years. That's right about the right time.
Hmm.
And this is what you have. And he told me that I probably had 15 months to live.
15
And
months
that's
to live.
15 months. Yeah. He's like,
Wow.
you probably have 15 months to live. And I was like, no, I have a new baby at home. I have to raise her.
Impossible.
Um, I no, tell me another option. This, I'm gonna fight this. What can I do? And my husband's sitting over to my left and he's just in shock. He's listening, but he's not saying anything. And I just looked at the doctor. I said, that's not acceptable. Tell me what I need to do.
Hmm.
And he's like, well, you could do chemo and radiation. And if you're lucky, you'll get to 5 years. This is, or there's this surgery that they're doing that's kind of experimental, but if you're lucky, you could get 10 years. And the best place to have this surgery would be in Boston. And my husband's like, get us to Boston. He just perked up. He's like, get us to Boston, whatever we need. That's where we need to be, get us there. So 12 days later, we were in Boston.
Hmm.
And I'm so thankful to that doctor. Dr. Flink was his name. He was my calm in the storm. He called my insurance company and he told them to take care of it, like treat this as inpatient. She needs to go there. He called Boston, got everything, settled in Boston. So I would just had to show up and everything was there. So I flew to Boston to see if I was a candidate for the surgery. And sure enough, I was.
Thank
So
God.
yeah. And so I was lucky enough to get on the roster to have surgery. And my surgery anniversary is coming up on February 2nd.
And look at you, praise God. And look at you. When you talk
So,
about the doctor saying you have 15 months to live and you are here alive 15
yep,
years later,
15 years.
thank
Yes.
God for science. Thank God
Yep.
for trials. I keep
Yes.
saying
Yes.
that.
Still,
Bless God.
yeah. And those doctors that are looking for better treatments and better trials. I always joke and say I was diagnosed back in the dark ages
Mm-hmm.
because treatments and surgery have gotten so much better since then.
Yes.
So yeah, so I was lucky. I was a candidate for the surgery because it's a hard surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm very thankful. So I've lived the last 15 years with one lung.
So they took out one lung.
Yep.
That
Yep.
was your surgery. That was
Yep.
obviously the lung that was affected. But you
Yep.
said it wasn't in the lining. So that
So
it was inside, but in the lining, right?
yeah, yeah. But it affected it, it had like worked its way. The tumor was on the lining of the lung, but it also like invaded the lung itself. So
Yes.
that's why best case scenario, I was young, I was healthy otherwise. My doctor seemed to think that lung removal was the best option
Mm,
for me at that
mm,
time. And they've changed their approach on that, in the last 15 years. They now do more, just they remove the lining of the lung and they leave the lung intact if they can.
if it's
So
possible, yes.
yeah, yeah.
Depending on
So
how far gone the tumor has been,
yep,
right?
yep, yep.
Okay.
So, and if it's, contained to the area. So yeah. So things
Uh,
have changed a lot in the last 15 years,
Things
but I'm
have really
thankful.
changed.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so, very much so. We thank, like I said, we really thank God for the trials that are coming about. I mean, even if it was in the dark ages, this happened to you, you're
Yeah.
still standing. I don't
Yep.
care being left with 1 out of 2, but I'm
Yep.
still here. You
Yep.
understand what I'm
Yep.
saying?
I always joke and say
Wow.
God gave us two for a reason,
Yes,
you
God
know.
gave us 2 for a reason. So if one
So
goes, well, at least you're still standing
yep.
on one.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Wow, that's
So
thank you for that. So I was reading up on this and I was shocked to know that asbestos is banned in 90 industrialized countries,
yep.
but not in the US.
Nope.
How on earth, how is this even possible with all the data and evidence that shows that it is carcinogenic? How is that?
Politics, to be
Politics.
bluntly honest.
Yes.
So there's one industry where asbestos is still used quite regularly, and that's the chlor-alkali industry. So bleach, chlorine, anything like that, they use asbestos in the filters of this chlor-alkali industry, and that's all I know. Now, that's not where a majority of asbestos exposure comes from anymore. Most asbestos exposures come from household exposure,
Mm-hmm.
workplace exposure, exposure in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So, they've been working to ban it, and there's progress, I should say. You know, we had better progress before the Trump administration. I could get into a whole lot of politics, but I don't want to do that here. But
I
we
know.
can just say it's mainly politics and it's
Mm,
political and money.
mm-hmm,
So that's why.
mm-hmm. So when
So
you're being called to all these high level conferences to do with this rare disease, when you talk to them, do you and the other um, meso community, do you bring this up? Do you lobby lawmakers to try and see that this is banned? Because seriously, something has to be done about it.
there are entities that do that, yes. The nonprofit that I volunteer with is mainly concerned about the treatment of the disease as itself.
Um, you know, what are you guys doing as advocates to try and lobby lawmakers to see that this hazardous substance is banned?
So I've been to Capitol Hill and I have worked with um, organizations before to try and get asbestos ban, and it is political and it's big business, and the asbestos lobby unfortunately is very rich and very powerful. And then
Wow.
you have us little guys out there trying to fight against it. So
Mhm.
it's ridiculous. It's just,
It's
it
a
should be
mafia.
banned. But the biggest problem is, yeah, and the biggest problem is the legacy asbestos, and it's asbestos that's already in the environment. So we can go ahead and ban the use of asbestos and all the new uses of asbestos, but that does nothing to touch the thousands and millions of pounds that's already in the environment, that's already in the houses in the form of insulation, that's already in the cars in the form of brakes and that sort of thing. So until we get laws on the books that are going to deal with the legacy asbestos and the
Call
deal
it
with
the
that,
legacy
I really
asbestos.
don't. Yeah, because it's the legacy. It's there. There's nothing we can
It's
do
there.
about it.
You
It's
can't
the legacy of
you can't.
the,
Yeah, especially
but
when it comes to like
yeah,
old buildings and it,
yep,
it it would always be. I mean,
yeah,
under the floors,
yeah,
tiles, all these
yep,
kind of things.
yep.
Hmm.
And it's a naturally occurring mineral. So it's a mineral that's mined. A lot of times it's in, of course, they found it in cosmetics,
Yes,
and the Johnson and Johnson's baby powder,
talc.
because asbestos, yep, asbestos is found near talc deposits,
Mm-hmm.
and talc is also a mineral.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that has talc in it is also suspect. So, it's this huge problem that's bigger than I can attack on my own. It needs tons of money and tons of environmental people. And actually, the only entity that can ban asbestos is the EPA.
EPA. Yes.
So the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency,
Yes.
and for the last 4 years, their hands have been tied and they've been crippled. They haven't been able to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully going forward with the new administration, a more pro-environment and pro-health administration,
Mm-hmm.
that we will see movement in the area of banning the asbestos once and for all. In the
I'm sure there'll be
meantime,
some, improvement.
I hope so. What's more important to me though than banning asbestos is finding treatments and funding research to help find a cure. That's where we're going to see more promising,
Yes, results.
results in my idea. And I've been around this for 15 years.
Yeah.
I've seen so much in the way of going to Capitol Hill. I've been doing that for 12 years,
Mm-hmm.
and fighting for it and just getting the door slammed in my face and like, oh, there's nothing that can be done. So
Mm-hmm.
it's incredibly frustrating. But when you approach it from a healthcare standpoint and a research standpoint, and when you approach it from the standpoint of helping people and healthcare, it's a lot more inviting. And I think
Yes.
we're going to have a lot better results in finding a cure or better, more adequate treatments that way. So that's kind of where I'm at in the whole thing. Um, until the EPA is going to step up and do something, I don't know how one person can do a lot. I make my voice heard, absolutely. But until there's awareness about mesothelioma, until people know more about mesothelioma, know what it does, how sick it makes people and what causes it, nothing's going to happen in the asbestos arena because nobody feels like it's a threat. Oh, that stuff hasn't been used for decades. You don't see it as a threat unless you're sick from it or have
Yeah.
had somebody you know sick from it. So it's very difficult. It's been an uphill battle, but I tend to fight on the side of medical advancements
Yes.
and supporting the nonprofit that supports research into the disease, and that's kind of where my heart is.
Yes, I agree with you totally. As you know, that area of advocacy, clinical trials, research, increased funding for research, that would go further than actually, because I think it's going to be very difficult to even ban for the next how many years, because this is something that is found everywhere. And like you rightly said, one person cannot be a voice against the, the big guys there. It's like, kind of thing.
Well, I don't have the
So,
money,
yeah,
it's like
they have the
it takes
money.
money and the power
And then, most of these institutions, they rely on politics, to be able to move forward. And yes, I agree.